everyone, and welcome to Cargo Transportation Masterclass, a fresh start for shippers globally. This is the only global online event dedicated to support fellow business owners in the cargo transportation industry to bounce back faster after market collapse. And I'm super excited to introduce to you today my fellow Bian Aoaeh. Now you will have to tell you how to pronounce your last name.
Actually, you are very, very close. You're very, very close.
Perfect, very good. So
you're very close.
Bian is co-founder and general partner at Refashion Ventures, New York State-based early-stage startup in supply chain technology venture firm, which is helping by investing into startups. Bian is also co-founder at the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation, a network of grassroots-driven communities of people who are obsessively enthusiastic about supply chain, innovation, and technology. Thank you so much, Bian, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. So we were laughing just before about how to pronounce my last name. People look at it and they say, oh my God, it's all vowels. How do I say this? It's pronounced Aoaeh.
Aoaeh.
So Bian Aoaeh. Yeah, it's not as bad as it looks.
My last name, it looks okay, but it is worse to pronounce it. So no worries. We are moving into the right direction.
So where do you?
I pronounce it Jasutiene, but everywhere globally it is quite difficult to get it. Bian,
that's how I thought it would be pronounced. I wasn't too far off.
All right.
I'm glad to know I wasn't far off.
Then it's good. Bian, today we are sharing with you insights on what startups in the supply chain can do to sustain pandemic. And you have extensive experience in building ventures and financing them, and during good times and the bad times in particular. And but before we deep dive into our conversation, can you share with us how did you come up with the idea to set Refashion Ventures?
So Refashion Ventures has come from my experience as an investor. My experience as an investor started in 2008 when I joined a family office. And as you know, the world economy was in another difficult spot then. For the first 2 years, I worked on two simultaneous turnaround assignments. So one in the fine dining restaurant industry and one in private jets, in the private jet charter business. In 2011, the family office started building a venture fund. And I was the second employee at the family office, the first person on the investing team. So I was there from the beginning of our effort to build the venture fund. And we decided to build a seed stage fund. Ultimately, we deployed $98 million of AUM in two funds. We made 51 investments. And in 2014, I started to think about developing a specialization. So between 2011 and 2014, I was a generalist seed stage VC. Around 2014, I started thinking about specializing. And I wanted an area where technology could make a big difference. I wanted an area that was global in nature and where the problem would never go away. The problems would never go away. And I wanted something that was difficult, because I think those are the sorts of areas where if you get it right, you can make a really good investment. And so I started thinking about supply chain. In 2016, I met my co-founder, Lisa. And coincidentally, she too had been thinking along those lines. I had been thinking about it from the perspective of logistics. She had been thinking about it from the perspective of the fashion industry. And so we started collaborating very frequently, I'd say several times a week. In 2018, I left my former fund and I was at a crossroads. I could join an existing fund and build a supply chain specialization there, or I could team up with Lisa and we could build a supply chain fund. Ultimately, I decided to take the more difficult path,
of course,
which was to team up with Lisa and build a supply chain fund. And when we think of a supply chain fund, we think of investing in supply chain technology and innovation, but doing that across industries. And so when people ask me, I say that we are building a specialized generalist in terms of what our fund is going to look like. So we are a specialist in the sense that a supply chain is all that we think about: supply chain management, supply chain logistics, and supply chain finance. But we think about those three things across industries. So construction, fashion and apparel, agriculture, obviously transportation and logistics, healthcare, which is of primary concern right now, education, ultimately things like energy and so on and so forth. But that's the background. We're trying to raise. We're still in the process of raising our first fund, so we don't have any capital committed to us yet, and we're not deploying into startups yet, but there are a lot of other things that we do to help the startups that we encounter.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're going to speak with you today. New York Supply Chain Meetup. It's really innovative way to bring the brightest minds together. Tell us more about this.
So that also arose during this period when I told you I was thinking about what to specialize in. So between my conversations with Lisa after I met her and while I was doing my own work, I spent some time learning about the trucking industry. I spent some time learning about the shipping industry. I talked to a lot of people and did a lot of reading on my own. And what I noticed was that when I met startup founders, typically they understood the technology extremely well. They generally did not understand the business side of the equation as well as they needed to. And if you're going to build a new innovation that you're going to sell to the supply chain and operations function in a business, you need to, the buyer that you're going to be dealing with needs to trust that you know what you're doing, right? This is mission critical stuff for all those companies. On the other hand, when I was talking to executives in the business, whether they were at the mid-level, junior, or at the very senior level, it became clear to me that they had the opposite problem. So these were people who were thinking about buying new innovations to help them in their business. They knew the business issues extremely well. They didn't understand how far the technology has come to date. And so one morning I was at my desk at 7 a.m. and a light bulb went off in my head. I said, surely someone has realized that these two groups of people should be brought together in a very informal way, right? It shouldn't be high stakes. There should be nothing big that you're risking. But the goal would be to learn from one another. And hopefully, as you learn from one another and build trust, you start to do business with each other. And so I said, it seems to me that there should be a meetup and I should go and join that meetup. And when I looked, there was no meetup. So I didn't even really think about it. I just said, this should exist. I'm going to start it. And so I started it. Very quickly, we launched in November we started in August of 2017, had our first event, our launch event in November of 2017. 150 people came. It was standing room only. It was insane. And then I would say by mid 2018, actually, even before we launched, people asked if we could help them create a similar community in other places. And so in 2018, we said, okay, if anyone wants to create a community like this one where they live, we will help them. And if they want to be part of our network, that's perfectly fine. And so then we started creating the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation to become a network of communities. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because
Yes.
if you're a startup in another part of the world building technology and innovation for supply chain, at some point you want to do business in New York. You either want to talk to investors in New York, or you want to talk to customers in New York. You want to open an office in New York. And so it seems to make sense that people like the idea of building a chapter of the community where they live, and then being connected to the founding chapter in New York.
So true. Bian, startups, they usually don't run out of ideas, but they run out of cash.
Yep.
What are the ways to save cash now?
So this is an interesting question, especially in the time that we're living in now. And if people are paying attention, they'll probably notice that there are a number of books about disruption behind me. So everybody knows the innovator's dilemma. But very few people have read the innovator's solution. And so there is this notion that as a startup, you should raise as much money as you can. You should spend as much of it as quickly as you can. And you should keep raising until you either go out of business or until things work. And that is I'm obviously paraphrasing and summarizing. But you get the point. And that is a somewhat perverse way of thinking about it. Yes, you want to do discovery. Yes, you want to grow fast. All those things are true. But you have to do it in a way that gives you optionality. And by optionality, I mean that you have to do it in a way that gives you time to figure out what the right business model is. And so one way to think about it, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get the quotation right, but in the innovator's solution, the key message is that startups should be patient for growth, but impatient for profit. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You're patient for growth because you really shouldn't put your foot to the metal on growth until you figure out what the right business model is for what the problem that you're solving. On the other hand, being impatient for profit is how you give yourself optionality, because if you're profitable, you're sustainable. And if you're sustainable, then you can exist for as long as you need to figure things out.
That's true. You can outlive crisis. That's true.
Yes, you can outlive a crisis. Now, so that's a little on the theoretical side of things. I'm sure your listeners want some practical tips. So, for example, some investors do not like the idea of startups doing any business services consulting. Right, so they want you to just build the technology and sell the technology. That's it. However, some of the most successful startups around, for a long time, had a consulting side of their business that supplemented the side that was strictly selling technology. Right. So one of them, I think, is Viva Systems. I think Workday also fits that mold. I don't think there's anyone listening who would say, I don't want to be as successful as Viva Systems or Workday. And I think even some of the bigger tech companies adopted that strategy, right? So for a while, your revenue from consulting and services outpaces your revenues from technology sales. And then you get to a point where that is flipped. and services and consulting becomes a very minor part of what you do. And your regular technology business, selling software to your customers, becomes a dominant part of what you do. So that's one example of an idea that startups should consider very seriously.
And thank you very much for bringing this topic, because indeed, as you told, startups usually concentrate to technology, raising money, and when the tough times comes and all these opportunities close down, they should be able to carry on with the business, and consultancy indeed is a perfect solution.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it does not cost much, and it comes from their expertise, and it can drive value to keep employees together.
Yes, yes. And I think the beauty of consulting is that you have the flexibility to be as creative about the type of consulting that you do. And so without going into too much detail, that's really what I would urge founding teams to consider, that you bring the team together and you have a very open conversation about what the team can do, right? Given your expertise, your customer base, your previous experience, and your network, what can the team collectively do to ensure that the company doesn't have to go out?
Brian, speaking about the opportunities, what startups else can do, do you have any ideas how we could become part of COVID-19 solution? Even if we are in supply chain.
That's another fantastic question, because I think we're all in this weird situation where, there's a crisis around us. Our businesses are in a difficult position, mostly, and we feel helpless. And so that has an effect on us mentally, psychologically, and financially. And even though often we will start by focusing on the financial problems that we're facing, I think if you can do things that boost your psyche and your emotions, I think that allows you the open-mindedness to think creatively about the financial straits that you're in. And so I really think that becoming part of an effort to contribute to the fight against COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, as they call it, is critical, right? So one might be donating products and services to the cause, right? So if you are a company that is developing a product for data analysis, maybe donating the product to people who need to do some data analysis related to beating this crisis. If people on the team have particular expertise that they can lend to a volunteer organization that's involved in the fight against the virus, creating the flexibility to allow them to do that in some capacity. Obviously, some companies might be in a position where they can make a financial contribution to organizations that need the support. That's another way to do it. I'd also like to go back to the previous question on what startups can do to make it through this period. And I'm remembering advice I gave a founder who was having a difficult time raising and was also running out of runway. And and we had a conversation on the phone, and based on what he told me, I said to him, well, you've just told me that you have this really big customer who really likes the product. They like it so much that they're now going to roll it out across the whole company. The problem is that the payment terms are not in your favor. Why don't you go to them and have a heart-to-heart conversation with them and say, look, we're trying to raise a round. We're having difficulty raising the round. would you consider paying us upfront at a discount, right? We'll give you a discount. You pay us upfront for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years or whatever it is. You have the discount locked in for that period. And at the end of the period, we go back to the regular rates. For you, it's going to make a huge difference. For them, it's a rounding error on their balance sheet. It's a rounding error on their balance sheet. Nobody is going to care. Why don't you consider having that conversation? And he said, I hadn't thought about it. And I said, well,
that's exactly.
You don't just walk in and just have the conversation on the fly, right? You sit down with your executive team, with the account executive, and you methodically plan what you're going to say, what you're going to ask for, how you're going to justify it. And you count on the trust that you've built with them. Because at the end of a lot of the time, we forget this. At the end of the day, the world works, business works because of relationships between people. And use the strength of that relationship and have the conversation and see what happens. To the best of my knowledge, he had the conversation, it went well. That happened, and then coincidentally, he succeeded in raising the round. So he killed 2 birds with one stone.
And it's a very good point. Look, it brings us to our next question. After a global pandemic, equity financing will be strained. Can you share with us what will be the ways of getting money in without giving equity away?
It's the same answer I gave before. Almost everything is on the table. So competing in pitch competitions, seeking grants, where that's possible, seeking grants, consulting, doing consulting, that has to be on the table. And thinking about markets where they have the same problem, but that you might not have thought about to begin with. So I'll give you an example. There is a problem around team productivity, right? That exists in different industries. And a lot of work happens in email, or these days, some of it is happening in Slack, depending on the industry you're in. It happens with Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, Word documents, and that sort of thing. And as the pace of business quickens in different industries, it becomes much more difficult to prevent things from falling through the cracks. And in some cases, when that happens, it's not a big deal. But there are a few industries in which, if something like that happens, it can be a material. It can cause a material injury to the transaction or to the company. And so if you're building such an application to solve this problem, let's say you're building it in shipping, in bulk shipping.
Right.
Well, it's possible that this same problem exists in the world of finance, where they do these massive mergers and acquisitions deals. And a lot of it is happening in emails and emails and inboxes and whatnot. Or even if they have technology that is useful, it might not work as well as technology that can be built today. It's possible that this is also a problem in commercial real estate, right, where they're working multiple parties, lawyers, accountants, architects are working on a commercial real estate transaction, things of that sort. It's possible that the problem exists in other industries. And so let's say you started in bulk shipping and hadn't thought about these other industries, then you have to speed up your way of thinking about at what point do I start to invest some resources in figuring out how to sell into these other markets. Or let's say you're a company that started in Europe and your original plan was to focus on Europe before you look abroad. Well, maybe you now have to accelerate some of those efforts. And someone listening to me might say, well, isn't that going to require a heavy investment in people and 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 facility and so forth, and might do it cost effectively, right? The goal is to do it in a way that's sustainable and that allows you to get through this part. Right. So without knowing all the details about your business and all the details about the types of customers you'd be going after and so on and so forth, the thing I'd say is think outside the box and think about how you can do it so that the benefits far outweighs the cost.
So true. Brian, here you are throwing real value bombs, because technology companies who are in logistics space, most of the time, they never ever think of how we can bring value outside of global cargo transportation industry.
Yeah.
While today is the really perfect moment to go and search for these opportunities.
Yes.
Because sometimes their technology, which they are using, or their knowledge, they need just a little tweak.
Yes.
To serve the adjacent industries.
Yes, just that's exactly it. Sometimes just a little tweak.
Exactly.
And it would be perfect for an adjacent industry.
Yeah. Exactly. Brian, what are the core functionalities of the supply chain companies which remain very much needed even during pandemic times?
So even in good times, this has been my advice to the founders that I have spoken to. Even in good times, to succeed as a supply chain technology company that's bringing new innovation to market, you really need to demonstrate that you add value on the first day. It has to be clear to your potential customer, because if you aren't going to add value on the first day, and depending on the specific product or the specific customer, the definition of value might be different. For example, in trucking, I tell people, look, if you're building technology for the owner operator in the trucking business, you have to demonstrate that you can immediately help them find profitable loads, because their profit margins are thin, and every day they're thinking about how to end the year in the black. And so if you can't demonstrate very quickly, ideally on the first day, that you can do a better job of helping them make a profit, you probably will not last. They might test you for a while, but ultimately they'll go back to their old ways, because in addition to technological switching costs, there are also psychological switching costs, right? They're much more comfortable with their old ways than they are with this new thing.
No, but this is true. And what we also notice in industry, that trackers, they are tired. There is app fatigue.
Yes.
Download subscription here, subscription there, membership here, membership there. It's easy to mislead them as well. And that's why there is sometimes the block. No more application for me.
And that's why you have to be demonstrably better than whatever they're doing now. It can't be, oh, try this and see if it's better, or try this and see if it's easier. No, can you help me make a profit or not?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Last year, I ended the year with a 3% margin.
Yes.
Can you persuasively convince me that using your products, I can end this year with a 5% margin? And if you can, well, I'll listen.
Yes,
I can't guarantee that I'll remain a customer forever. I'll listen, and maybe I'll get someone on my team to check it out. But I think that's the mindset that founders have to be.
Absolutely. Brian, do you agree that this global pandemic, it will also change the way companies sell? because it looks like that will be not enough to sell dashboards, colors, visibility, like all these intangible assets. But, companies will really have to bring value on the table.
Yes. Yes, that's a very easy one. The
But
answer is yes.
I believe it will also separate the startups who will survive or who will even thrive after market shrink.
Yes, that's it. It will separate those who thrive, who survive and go on to thrive, from those who be. And the thing you notice a lot with, or the thing I think that I've noticed a lot with supply chain startups is that there are a lot of fast followers, right? So someone starts solving a problem. The supply chain market is so massive. Others see an early sign of success, and then a lot of other startups start to copy what the leader is doing. And it's not always clear if the leader is adopting the right approach, or if someone else that came in later is going to be the one that finds the right approach. But invariably, there's a lot of noise around the problem. And so, just like you were saying, there's a lot of, our colors are prettier, and there's this intangible thing and this intangible thing, and you dig down and you discover that there isn't really a lot of value there. And so the teams that can really solve the problem for the customer in a way that is easier, in a way that drives a value to the bottom line, and in a way that is durable from the point of view of infrastructure, I think those are the teams that will succeed.
Amen. Brian, you shared with us many insights on what startups should do to stay in business and bounce back faster and even stronger. If I asked you, what would be only one advice, what companies could do today to ensure this sustainable profitability, what would it be?
I actually I had a conversation about this in class on Wednesday last week. I didn't mention this, but I teach operations management at the School of Engineering at NYU.
Mm-hmm.
And what were we talking about? I think we were talking about process strategies and the specific point that I was making, it was about capacity expansion.
Uh-huh.
There are basically four ways in which you can think about capacity expansion. So one, you make a forecast and then you increase capacity ahead of your projections or forecasts, but you do it incrementally. The second way, you make a forecast and you increase your capacity significantly, but ahead of your projections or forecasts. The third way, you make a forecast, but you deliberately maintain your capacity such that it is less than your forecast or your projections. And the fourth way, you make a forecast and you maintain your capacity such that it is significantly less than what your forecast would predict. And the point I was making to the class is that mature companies can do the first two, right? So you make a forecast because you have a great handle on how your industry operates and how your business runs and the cycles within the business, customer buying patterns and whatnot. You make a forecast, and because you have a good handle on those things, you can afford to, and you also have a stronger balance sheet. Yes. Generally.
Oh yes.
You can afford to expand capacity ahead of demand actually.
That's true. Right?
If you're a startup, you can't afford you can't afford to do that. In fact, you should not do that, even if you could afford to. And so I said, the point I was making was that startups should probably focus on the last two, and particularly, in my opinion, should focus on the third, which is that generally, until they found product market fit, they should only expand capacity once demand has actually showed up and they feel certain that that demand is there to stay. So that's the framework that I'd use in thinking about it. And product market fit, it's a funny thing. You encounter startups and everyone thinks they found product market fit, and then 6 months later, they're in a lot of trouble.
Product change, product change, or market change.
The market change all of a sudden. And so it's one of those things where it's difficult to, I would say, if it is sustained for 6 months or a year, then you can probably start to think about doing things slightly differently. But otherwise, it's tough. Without knowing the specifics of a startup's situation, it's tough to give advice. But I think the idea that you don't expand your capacity before demand has materialized is a framework that should be easy to understand and remember.
And particularly, it is relevant now.
Yes,
especially now.
Yes,
and it wraps up very well our conversation. Brian, I know that you have free gift to offer to our audience. What is it?
So the world as a supply chain is an idea that we came up with as we were getting the New York Supply Chain Meetup and the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation off the ground. It's our mantra. And it is actually part of a longer statement. The statement is the past was built on, the past ran on supply chains. The present runs on supply chains. The future will run on supply chains. The world is a supply chain. And so the world is a supply chain is a booklet. It's about, I think, 36 pages or something. It's a quick read that Lisa and I wrote. And in it, we are trying to explain to the reader why we think that because of a combination of social, economic, technological, and environmental factors, which we feel are irreversible, the next 50 years is going to be a great time of innovation in supply chain, a great period of technological innovation in supply chain. And because of those things, we think it's going to present the biggest investment opportunity of our lifetime. And that's why we're building Refashioned Ventures. So we attempt to make an argument to that effect in the book.
But everything is linked. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your insights, for sharing your gift with our audience, and for your generosity. Please tell us how our audience can find you, how we can follow you online.
Thank you. So I am really easy to find. If the listeners or viewers type Brian, Brian, and my last name Aoaeh, Aoaeh, into Google, there'll be a lot of links. So on Twitter, it should be easy to identify me. On LinkedIn, there are very few people with my name. I'm on Instagram, also using my name. They'll probably find my blog. They'll find the Worldwide Supply Chain Meetup Federation's webpage. And that will also lead them to Refashion's webpage. I also write a weekly column for Freight Waves, and so that should take them there as well. If they look under news, they'll probably find a lot of my Freight Waves articles.
Fantastic. Today, we discuss with Bian Aoaeh, Refashion Ventures Managing Director and Founder and real supply chain enthusiast. What opportunities exist for the startups in the supply chain, even during pandemic times, and how you can tap into and seize it. Thank you so much, Bian, for your time. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.